Brazil, the largest country in South America. Home to the world's greatest rainforest, to the biggest river system, famous for its sun, sea and samba. Today, it's one of the world's fastest growing economies. But that development has led to growing inequalities in income and wealth. Despite many protests, it is hosting both the World Cup and in 2016, the Olympics.
Football is worshipped here, like a national cult. But Brazil has another, much older religion.
One that has been here since its founding by the Portuguese almost 500 years ago.
Outside of the United States, in terms of numbers, Brazil is the world's largest Christian country.
While church attendance in Britain has been plummeting for decades, here in Brazil, it's the opposite.
I'm not a Brazilian, but I'm fascinated by this country's mixture of people, its religious history, its passion for music, and its celebration of life.
And at the heart of that life is a richly spiritual existence.
So are you practicing two religions or one?
Both are only one within the heart.
That's something that you can smell in religion here. The mixture is everywhere.
I want to explore the incredible spiritual diversity of Brazil by traveling to 7 wonders.
At each, I will meet people to help me understand Brazil's complex past, what it means to be part of this vibrant and exciting country, the key ingredients that contribute to the unique nature of Brazilian Christianity. Still a few weeks to go, but the streets are already full as Rio de Janeiro gears up for its world-renowned carnival. My name is Robert Beckford. I'm a theologian and come from a family with British, West African and Jamaican ancestors, when I'm immediately struck at the incredible diversity of the people here, a bewildering fusion of race, ethnicity and culture.
For years, I've studied and followed the politics and developments of countries that have forged new identities out of colonialism, slavery, and immigration. Brazil was inhabited by numerous indigenous tribes for centuries, but it was the Portuguese who first opened it up to the West by accident.
On the 22nd of April 1500, a small Portuguese fleet of just 13 ships and 1,500 men were on their way to India when by chance they sighted the shores of what was later called Brazil.
The first Portuguese who arrived in Brazil placed a cross on the shore as a statement of claiming this newfound land for Catholic Christendom.
2 years later, in January 1502, a few Portuguese ships exploring the coast arrived in this bay.
Thinking it was a river delta, they named it the January River, or Rio de Janeiro. It's not actually a river delta, but a large natural harbour.
Dominating it today is our first wonder, the statue of Christ the Redeemer. It's not just the wonder of Brazil, but also now, officially, one of the 7 wonders of the world.
This extraordinary statue towers above the Rio skyline and has become an instantly recognizable symbol of Brazil across the world. As you arrive at its feet, you see not only what an engineering marvel it is, not only the amazing view in every direction, but the grand ambition of its creator's vision. When it was originally conceived just after the First World War, Rio was Brazil's capital. A group of wealthy Brazilians feared an advancing tide of godlessness, and they wanted a big statue to help reclaim Brazil for Christianity. A symbol to signify the redemption of mankind at Jesus' crucifixion that could be seen all over the city. So they decided to build it on the biggest hill. It's an astonishing achievement, and you only fully appreciate it when you're up close. Despite its immense scale, the subtle details are amazing. You can actually see the marks of the nails in his hands, and his heart is clearly marked out too. It took 10 years to build and is 30 meters tall, and until very recently was the largest Art Deco statue in the world. Under the towering figure, I have arranged to meet Zica de Milo. He was a Catholic priest for 18 years, becoming one of Brazil's pop star preachers before giving it all up to be a professor of theology at a local university.
I think that the symbolism of the Christ the Redeemer is mainly the protection that he inspired us. And also the hospitalities. He's facing the Great Bay, so he's welcoming everybody.
What was the vision behind its creation?
Mainly to show how strong the Catholic faith is, definitely connected to the supremacy of the Catholic Church.
Although it's meant to represent Christ at the moment of his agonizing death, its real power for me is its open arm gesture, drawing you into Brazil, a sense that anyone and everyone is welcome here. Something that is clearly not lost on the 5 million tourists who visit this site every year. On the statue's 75th anniversary in 2006, a special chapel was built into the base. Weddings and baptisms can be performed here, and every Sunday there's a service performed by Padre Omar. Anyone can come.
Para o Cristo, e vamos rezar juntos a grande oração, a oração que Ele nos ensinou. Pai nosso que estás nos céus, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino, seja feita a vossa vontade, assim na terra como no céu. Nós percebemos que esse espaço
We've come to realize that this space brings a lot of symbolism.
muito forte.
We saw the need to reopen the chapel to become a place of prayer, of meeting God, to really sense the great meaning of Christ, the Redeemer of the universe.
Do Redentor do Universo.
Padre Omar is not only a priest, he's also a singer, and he wanted to explain to me that music, especially Brazil's famous samba, was a key ingredient in understanding Brazilian Christianity.
Vamos lá. Peço a Deus. Peço a Deus. Mundo cheio de paz. Peço a Deus. Que alcance os seus ideias.
I use music as an instrument of evangelization to make the message of Jesus Christ accessible to people.
I've never been on a session.
Então essa integração.
So this integration between music, the samba, the Brazilian culture and the faith is of great importance to us and to our communication with the city.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen. How do you reconcile bringing African traditional music, samba, to Catholicism and bring the two together?
A Bíblia nos mostra.
The Bible shows us that we should praise God with our body and soul. We should sing and dance in the presence of God. And in the same way, we do that, joining the musicality of Brazil and our faith. Like that, we create this important movement.
Esse movimento importante.
Samba is a very African beat. How it came to Brazil and was integrated into the culture is a key part of our story. A clue to its origins lies 1,000 miles to the north in the city of Salvador, the first colonial capital. In the center of the city lies one of Brazil's oldest colonial churches. Our next wonder, the São Francisco Church. This is magnificent. Just look at the gold everywhere and the amazing, intricate work. This is an interior that sets out to impress, to overwhelm. Built at the height of Portugal's colonial empire in the 1700s, it is a church designed to show off the wealth and power of the Catholic establishment and the ruling elite of that time. All the surface's walls, columns, vaults, ceilings are covered with golden woodwork and paintings. Brazil, at that time, was a major source of gold. The church is a magnificent example of the Baroque style of the time.
It was built in the first decade that gold was discovered in Brazil. We had plenty of gold in the country. We exported gold to the world. And that church is covered with more than 1 ton of gold.
Francisco, what would it have been like to have worshipped here in the 1800s?
Well, sometimes I stop to imagine it. Flowers, incense, the light of the candles, the Baroque music. And the spirit of the time, the faith and the power of the church.
The altar is spectacular. Francisco, tell me the story behind the design of this altar.
Well, that is the splendor of Baroque. You see it's somehow different from the other part of the church. You see the roof, for example, if it has Arabian influence, the geometric design. It's more Arabic than Occidental art. Also, the floor is beautiful with Italian influence. The lamp is very special because it has 80 kilos of pure silver. At that time, during the 18th century, 1 kilo of silver would cost 3 kilos of gold.
So gold was very definitely plentiful.
Yeah, plenty of gold. Once I read a magazine in Italy saying that San Francisco was the splendor of the Baroque of the Americas.
But this church hides a darker story. When the Portuguese came to Brazil, they wanted to exploit this country for its natural resources. And for that, they needed manpower, massive manpower and cheap. They decided to import Africans as slaves. Outside Africa, Brazil had the highest number of Africans, all slaves, in the world.
The slaves, when they were first brought into the country, the minute they put their feet on the ground, they had to be baptized. They had to forget, try to forget their religions and become Catholics.
The slaves stood here. They were not allowed to go any further. And as a concession, they were given these 2 saints to pray to. One of the worshippers at the church is Vendetta. Her ancestors were slaves, brought here from Africa in the 1700s. She is a follower of a religion that for over 400 years has kept alive some of their original beliefs and traditions. Today, it's known as Candomblé. Candomblé temples are called casas, or houses, and Vendetta is taking me to one of the largest in Salvador.
Candomblé as a kind of adaptation of certain aspects of popular Catholicism to an African belief system that the slaves maintained when they came to Brazil.
Brazil was the last country in the world to officially abolish slavery. Until very recently, Candomblé followers could not openly perform their rituals and practices.
Candomblé became the focus of police repression. Candomblé sects were very often raided by the police. That was at a period of time when Brazilian governments wanted Brazil to become a kind of European country.
The head priestess told me that to avoid persecution, they even had to conceal their religious icons behind statues of Christian saints.
Here's an altar, but inside it's hollow. It's empty. So you'd have here, for example, St. Anthony, but inside, underneath, would be an African god.
So the African gods were hidden behind the Christian saints?
Yes, because of the prohibition, they said the ceremonies caused fear, because they didn't know the symbolism of our religion. They didn't respect it, because those were black people's things, people of African origin.
Today, nearly 2 million Brazilians claim to be followers of this religion. It translates as a dance to the gods. They use the repetitive and rhythmic music and dance as a call to the spirits. At its height, the dancers enter into a trance-like state.
It should be made very clear that we understand that religion for us is an expression of spirituality, Christianity, Candomblé, Spiritism. These are the same with different names, but the great essence is religiosity. It's the feeling.
What I've seen here, my ancestors would have practiced in Africa centuries ago. And it's still taking place here in Brazil, nearly 400 years on.
Worshippers of Candomblé believe that every person has their own individual Orisha, or god, who controls their destiny and acts as a protector. Vendetta invited me to the beach to offer thanks to hers.
I came to the sea to thank the Mother Goddess for my daughter's health. She went through a surgery, and I asked for her to come out unharmed, healthy and strong. Whenever I have a health problem or difficulties in the family, I seek her help, who is the mother of all Orishas.
The extraordinary thing is that Vendetta is also a practicing Catholic and sees no problem in combining the two traditions.
My grandmother used to take me to the church to attend the services, and she'd also bring me to the sea to offer thanks. At the same time, I went to pray in church. I'd also come and pray in the sea. So, the sea and the church are inside my heart. Here, I worship the goddess, the mother of nature, and there I pray to Mary, the mother of Jesus.
So are you practicing two religions or one?
Both are only one within the heart.
Like Vendetta's ancestors, mine were slaves too. They were captured in Africa and taken to the Caribbean, and they also brought their beliefs with them. And despite the brutal and dark years of persecution and oppression, the memory of Africa could not be completely erased and lives on in that unique Brazilian sense of music and rhythm, that dance to the gods.
And in the samba music that came out of it. What makes Brazil so unique today is that despite its brutal past, it has managed to take something from each of its different communities. The Portuguese introduced Christianity, the African slaves brought music and dance. But there were also hundreds of indigenous tribes already here. So I wondered what contribution they might have made. For that, I needed to travel even further north, into the heart of the Amazon jungle for our next wonder.
Here, in the most unlikely of places, in the city of Manaus, at the heart of the Amazon rainforest, stands this grand building.
The Teatro Amazonas, or the Amazon Theatre and Opera House. The end of the 19th century was a boom time for the Amazonian region of Brazil. It was flush with money from exports from its large rubber plantations. Manaus quickly became one of Brazil's richest cities, and this opera house was to be the jewel in the jungle, a symbol of the triumph of Christian civilization.
The rubber barons were making a lot of money, in that period. Really, really, really a lot of money. They didn't know, where to spend it. The Amazon was really not a place that people looked at in Brazil at all. It meant savagery, really. It had this very negative connotation in Brazil. Yeah. And these people were making money and they wanted to show, no, we are civilized as well.
At the time, it was a major engineering project as much of the building material had to be transported from Europe and then brought more than 1,000 miles through the newly cleared rainforest.
Built in the 1890s by the immensely rich rubber barons, mostly European immigrants, it was an attempt to reproduce the grandeur of a bygone age, a little bit of European splendor in the middle of the Amazon.
The walls, statues, and the columns are made with marble brought from Italy, as were the chandeliers. The ceiling tiles came from France. For a building in the middle of the rainforest, it's pretty impressive.
In its heyday, this was full of the great and good of the city. It was the place to be seen to show off your wealth.
The main hall boasts 4 levels, with seating for 700 people and a ceiling painted to look like the underside of the Eiffel Tower. And when opera was first performed here, it really put Manaus on the international map. But within 20 years of being built, artificial rubber was invented, and Brazil's rubber boom evaporated almost overnight. The wealthy barons moved on, and the opera house closed down. For nearly 90 years, there were no performances. 15 years ago, the then Brazilian government revived the building and restored it to its former glory. Today, it's used for music shows, dramas, and even choral singing. Opera House is now also used to promote Brazil's indigenous cultures. Fidelis is an indigenous Indian and has also become a famous Brazilian actor.
What does this venue mean to you?
Nowadays, there is a tendency to pay more attention to our local culture, and that has brought more indigenous people in here, and they feel this is theirs. Although our ancestors labored here, today we feel the Amazon Theatres is also ours, and has become a part of the life of the people.
This place was built by Europeans to explore their culture and their religion. What's your religious tradition?
I live between two worlds that I understand as religion today. I mean, the world that I live here, the churches, the choirs in the churches, and the world of my own childhood, where I was born, which is the world of my ancestral religion. So it's basically that, one foot in the city and another foot in the tribe. One day I'm inside a church watching a choir with the priests, and the next day with the shaman. I mean, these two worlds are what makes us Indians today.
It's this mix and merging of faiths and very different cultural traditions that make Brazilian Christianity one of the most diverse in the Americas. The early Portuguese missionaries used Manaus as a starting point in their attempts to convert the many indigenous Indian tribes living in the rainforest. It was the Jesuit priests who managed to stop the many massacres that took place as the early settlers opened up the forest. Fidelis wanted to take me to see his home village in the rainforest outside Manaus. There are still more than 800,000 Brazilians who identify themselves as Indians, divided into 200 different tribes, many with distinct languages. Most live along the rivers of the Amazon rainforest. Many practice a mixture of Catholicism and their own ancient traditions.
Can you show me around? I'm looking forward to seeing more.
Vamos, eu vou lhe apresentar aqui o cacique. Aqui existem aproximadamente 10 famílias que moram aqui. 10 famílias de indígenas do povo dessano.
What are your spiritual beliefs?
Bom, então nós indígenas, para nós indígenas.
Well, we Indians, we have our natural beliefs, which is that we have our God of the universe, who is the grandfather of the universe, the God of the world. So it's the only God we believe to be God. But we also believe that when we live in this world, we came from another, the first indigenous world. We transformed ourselves into this material world. And we will die here, and we believe we then go back to the mythological world, from which we can transform ourselves again into another species. You can be an animal, or you can be a woman in a different time. So that's what we believe. But we believe in God. We are also Catholics. And so we believe that God exists, but within our Indian mythology. That's what we believe.
Mitologia indígena é dessa forma que nós acreditamos.
Indian beliefs in the souls and investing nature with symbolic importance also mixes with Portuguese Catholicism in those areas where there were large numbers of Indians being brought into Portuguese colonial society.
We talk and believe about the souls in the purgatory in Catholicism, and so do the Indians. And this connection between the Indians and the souls passed onto the Brazilian Catholic tradition.
Passou na tradição católica
On Monday, you go and light candles to the souls. All this comes from the Brazilian indigenous world.
It's amazing to see two such separate and different belief systems work side by side. The Indian chief had no difficulty in equating his belief in the everlasting nature of spirits with Christianity's belief in the soul. For me, it's this fusion of religious beliefs, this willingness to mix the best of both worlds, holding on to the integrity of the Indian past without denying the importance of Christian belief. That is another key ingredient in Brazil's own brand of Christianity.
Catholicism in Brazil was strengthened in the early 20th century with another large-scale immigration of people from Europe, mostly working-class Germans and Italians. And again, like the first Portuguese and the African slaves, they brought their beliefs and traditions with them too. A desire to recreate a little bit of the old country in their new Brazilian home. Our next wonder of Brazil, the Metropolitan Cathedral in Sao Paulo.
It is this building that, to me, symbolizes the magnificence of Catholicism in Brazil.
It's the largest cathedral in South America, but its history highlights the fact that by the early 20th century, Catholicism in Brazil was facing a crisis of identity. At a time of massive social, political and industrial change in Brazil, this building was an attempt to reassert the power and magnificence of the traditional Catholic Church.
This neo-Gothic cathedral could be in almost any large industrial city in Europe. It was designed by German and Italian architects. Its dome is a copy of the one in Florence, and its marble and organ were imported from Italy too. So it seems as if there's a bit of a crisis of identity going on here. Is it really Brazilian or European?
It was a choice. It was a choice perhaps slightly misplaced in time because this cathedral was built in the 20th century. It was decided that the church would be monumental, large, in a beautiful style that would also say something about the architectural tradition of the church, of the history of the church. And that is why a new Gothic church was built here.
To be Brazilian is to always try to be European. You know, it's part of the Brazilian dilemma. To be civilized is to be European. You just have to choose which part of Europe you're going to emulate.
The Sao Paulo Cathedral Choir is one of Brazil's most well-known. And they still sing in Latin, the language of the old European Christian tradition. Ronaldo Santovano is the choir master.
Really amazing. Can you tell me, what were you practicing?
Today we are here getting ready for the Mass that is going to be celebrated. We have weekly rehearsals. Everyone here is a volunteer. They are the soul of our choir.
He is also the man in charge of an elaborate bell-ringing system in the cathedral.
I noticed in the practice you were singing in Latin. I just wondered, do you always perform in Latin or do you sometimes sing in Portuguese?
We are inside a cathedral where we can't forget that music in our own language is very new for our church. It's only 50 years since the Second Vatican Council allowed us to have music in Portuguese. But we can't forget the tradition of sacred music in Latin, the Gregorian chant, the great sacred music from the past.
For centuries, the Catholic Church had a complete monopoly of power over Brazil's religious life. But in the mid-19th century, many of the restrictions were lifted, and a new wave of Christian missionaries started to arrive from abroad. Many came from the United States, and one group built their first church here in Rio de Janeiro. Our next wonder, the Igreja Presbyterian Cathedral.
After the Roman Catholics, the Protestant Church is the largest Christian denomination in Brazil. But it wasn't always like this. For hundreds of years, during the Portuguese colonial rule, Protestant churches were severely persecuted. Today, they are the fastest growing of all the Christian churches, with nearly 1 in 5 Brazilians now claiming to belong to some form of Protestantism.
Gone is all the gold and silver and other Baroque ornamentation that we have seen in so many of the Catholic churches. The Protestant Reformation was brought about by a desire for a simpler, purer form of worship, a rejection of the pomp and pageantry of the Catholic Church. And you can really see it here. You know, this, one of the oldest Protestant churches in Brazil, is so different in its simplicity and style, in contrast to the Catholic churches here. But what was so radical about this cathedral was not what was in it or how it was decorated, but its very existence as a public place of worship, as until then, only Catholics had been allowed to build churches.
The official religion was the Roman Catholic, and all the other religions, Jews included, were not permitted to build buildings in church style, only as a house. When the Republic was proclaimed in Brazil, of course there was separation between church and state. Then we could build a building as church.
Is the Presbyterian tradition in Brazil growing?
Our denomination that has over 4,000 churches in Brazil, we were organizing 1 new church per week.
Today, Protestantism in Brazil is divided into hundreds of different denominations. One of the most popular are the Pentecostals, and they are building hundreds of new churches all over the country. Pentecostalism is an extraordinary phenomenon across the world in terms of how fast it's growing. I have first-hand experience of this. I was raised a Pentecostal. The Pentecostals dispense with many of the more traditional forms of worship and emphasize a more direct relationship with God. They are now the fastest growing denomination in the country, doubling their numbers to nearly 50 million believers in the last 30 years. Pastor Samuel Ferreira is one of Brazil's most famous Pentecostal preachers and leads this church.
What's the attraction of Brazilian Pentecostalism?
O mundo pentecostal.
The Pentecostal world, the Pentecostal doctrine, and the Pentecostal church brought God much closer. They made God real. Nowadays, you go to a Pentecostal church because you want to feel God. You want to worship God. That's why you see people crying, people raising their hands, people of all ages.
Levantadas das mais diferentes idades.
For me, the passion and the energy that I've just seen here makes Pentecostalism unique, as it manages to mix traditional elements of Christian worship with chanting and dancing and trance-like euphoric outpourings, drawing on Brazil's other religious traditions. Brazilians have taken an American import and given it a distinctive Brazilian identity.
Sem tua presença, Espírito Santo, nós não viveremos, Espírito Santo, queremos profetizar.
I think that Pentecostalism is doing well in Brazil for different reasons. Mainly, I think that the sense of community is something very important. They work a lot in poor areas, so they give them sense of belonging to a community. Also the propaganda, the way they work very professionally, so they have the targets to achieve. And another thing, I think that we love parties, we love the festivals. So and Pentecostal churches and charismatic movements are all about being happy, singing a lot, clapping hands, and we are very good on that. And that I think that's a big part of it.
Espírito Santo, a igreja te adora, Espírito Santo.
This is definitely not the sedate, hallowed Christianity of the state. It's the noisy, passionate Christianity of the people.
Hallelujah! Oh, hallelujah!
And its growing popularity is a major worry for the leaders of Brazil's Catholics.
É fenômeno cultural.
It is a cultural phenomenon, which takes place at a time of very big cultural changes, where people feel self-governing and want to be self-governing in their choices. I certainly look at this situation with some worry.
Com alguma preocupação.
For centuries, Brazil struggled with its own identity. And this has been reflected in its relationship with Christianity. Was it a European, or an African, or a South American nation? How could it fuse all the elements into a cohesive whole? When it was decided that the capital should be moved from Rio to a more central location, a unique opportunity arose to help create a new Brazil by building a completely modern city.
There's Brazil, and then there's Brasilia, a city unlike any other in this country. It was built to show the ambition and the aspiration that this country could aim for.
The city was built in the 1950s as a showpiece of the very latest in building design and urban planning. It has now been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its modern architecture. And at its heart is a completely new cathedral, our next wonder of Brazil, the Metropolitan Cathedral of Our Lady Aparecida.
These four figures, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, mark the continuity of a religious tradition, but the building and the landscape don't. The style suggests to me
the religion has moved on. The cathedral was designed by one of Brazil's and the world's most famous architects, Oscar Niemeyer. Stylistically, it marks a complete break with Brazil's colonial Portuguese, African, and indigenous past. Gone are any references to European neo-Gothic and Baroque cathedrals. Instead, it is a uniquely South American building, a symbol of a new Brazil.
On this journey, I've seen some wonderful buildings, places of worship, sites that reflect the history of this country. But this is so different. This is of the Brazil of the present and of the future. What makes this building distinctively Brazilian?
The free way and the inclusive way in which it welcomes the visitor and makes him feel part of the universe in a way that he connects himself directly to the skies, to the natural elements.
So in some respects it was a symbol of equality and inclusion by making it circular and making the focus the heavens rather than the priest.
The whole point was to bring a sense of sacrality to the place through the direct contact of the person who gets in with the heavens.
Creio em ti, Senhor, vindo de Maria, Filho eterno e santo.
Here in this cathedral, the style is more informal, more popular, more focused towards a new generation of believers.
Em nós, abrirás o reino do céu, minha gratidão.
In this space, the light pouring in, the colors, the angels up there. I think this is what Catholicism here is hoping for. Inclusion, progress, modernity. But will it be able to hold on to its historically dominant role?
Modern architecture always points to the future. It always has a desire of change in it. It always empowers the person so he can feel himself able to be an agent of change. And then in this way, it points to the future, to a better future, I hope.
I'm back in Rio, where last-minute preparations are now underway for our final wonder. This wonder is not an architectural marvel, but a celebration of what it means to be a Brazilian. For me, it combines all the ingredients we've encountered in Brazil's evolving relationship with Christianity: dance, music, worship, and passion. Here at the office of the mayor, they are celebrating the inauguration of a new symbolic leader of the city.
Wilson Neto recebe a chave da cidade das mãos de Sua Excelência, que é o prefeito da cidade, ao som da Marcha Hino do Rio, Cidade Maravilhosa, com a Banda Sinfônica do Rio de Janeiro, da Guarda Municipal.
Every year, a figure known as King Momo is selected from a number of hopefuls. Traditionally a tall, fat man, a figure of mockery, satire, and fun. He's been chosen to lead our final wonder of Brazil, the Carnival. The handing over of the keys to King Momo symbolizes his reign over the city and the beginning of the festivities. For the days of the carnival, he will in theory represent the people of the streets, the poor and the marginalized, as they take over the city.
Subversive. It's very subversive somehow. It's the one day that even the poor people is going to be like kings. We always want to celebrate and this kind of cathartic movement that, and it's very religious because of that. The origin of Carnival, it's the name Carnevale. It's like just saying goodbye to the meat because you're going to start the land. It's ancient and it's very religious because of that. So it's also very Christian.
Felipe, pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you. What is the history of Carnival?
The origin of Carnival is religious. It started as a response to the period of Lent and became well established in the Middle Ages. Lent is a time of denial and deprivation, and so, before this period begins, many people go into a frenzy of festivities, parties, celebrations, all this before the start of Lent, which is on Ash Wednesday. Carnival in itself is a religion, particularly in Brazil. It's a declaration of love that the people have to Carnival, which is almost a dedication. The samba schools are like sanctuaries, where you go praise your gods, the gods of samba, of Carnival, this kind of thing.
Every part of the city is involved in the festivities. Neighborhoods organize street parties and processions that often have special themes. This one pays homage to ancient Egyptian gods. I've come to one of the largest samba schools, Estácio, as it makes its final preparations. In a few days' time, it will compete with its rivals from around the city, with everyone hoping to be judged the best samba parade in Rio. Chavisco is the chief percussionist, and it's his job to work out the moves and keep the music in sync. Luana will lead the group, hoping to be crowned Samba Queen at the end of the carnival. At the heart of every carnival procession is, of course, that unique Brazilian blend of samba, music, and dance.
What does samba mean to Carnival?
Samba is like the Brazilian soul of Carnival. Carnival is not a Brazilian celebration, it's European. It was born in Middle Age Europe. But here in Brazil and in Rio de Janeiro, it has acquired this Brazilian soul. Samba is what defines Brazil during the Carnival.
But this is just the warm-up to the grand finale that takes place this evening. During the course of the day, over 1 million people will parade along this street. It's incredible.
Originally, all the final parades were held in the city centre, but today they have a purpose-built samba stadium and everyone in the city is now heading there. The competition is fierce, and every samba school's parade will be judged on aspects of their themes, music, costumes, and dance. Despite the fun, it's serious stuff for the competitors.
How are you feeling?
A bit tense about going into the stadium, but that's normal. Now we must try and keep cool so we can guide this wonderful percussion band. But I'm sure that we're going to do a great performance.
Most people coming to Carnival or watching on television just want to enjoy the world's biggest street party. But if you look, you can see each of the ingredients from our wonders and how they combine to make Brazilian Christianity so unique.
I think that religion is very present in Carnival. This kind of euphoria, this kind of proclaiming that life can be different somehow, even if just for 4 or 5 days. That's a very religious and powerful movement. It's something that changes you. You can feel the energy. It's something transcendent.
Good to see you again. How'd you feel?
It's a lot of emotion. My heart is racing. We are very confident. We have rehearsed a lot. Our school is coming to fight for the title, and we are sure to be champions.
All the best. Good luck.
Brazilians have taken all the diversity, the mixture, the amazing fusion of cultures that makes this country so different, and used them to transform the Carnival into a uniquely South American event.
Carnival today has become an expression of Brazilian culture and identity, and it's taken on a life of its own.
In the street parades and processions, you can see the welcoming of Christ the Redeemer as he overlooks the city. In the wild and colourful costumes, you can see the glitz and decorations that adorn the old Catholic churches, like the one in Salvador. With the incredible beat and rhythm of the samba, you can see the dance to the gods that the African slaves brought with them.
And finally, with that desire to create something unique, to have the biggest, noisiest and rowdiest street party in the whole world, you can also see the true Brazil in this, our final and most extraordinary wonder.
Brazil's other religion tomorrow. Live coverage of the World Cup, Germany against Ghana on BBC One at 7:30. We're on the road here on BBC Two on Sunday, a taxi driver's worldview with brand new A Cabbie Abroad at 9. And next tonight, colourful comedians Susan Calman, Lisa Tarbuck and Sandy Toksvig join in a kaleidoscopic QI.